Welcome to another Village Arts Insights with me, Rabbi Drew, and also, of course, Jessica, our art specialist. We are here in this little nook between the elevators and the therapy room, and we have a new exhibit here.
Yeah, we are blessed to have 5 artworks by a local artist named Beth Goldstein. She actually is someone who's very familiar with Cedar Village. She's done several works of art that are actually located permanently around the building that I'd love to talk to you a little bit later about. But for now, we have 5 of her works, which is part of a larger series. And so we're going to show you the works behind us, talk a little bit about them, and then later you will have a chance to see a conversation that I had, a little Q&A session with her via Zoom about the art and her work as an artist in general, not just these pieces.
So the exhibit we have here from the artist, her name is Beth Goldstein, is the art of the Hebrew Aleph Beit. Now the Aleph Beit sounds very similar to alphabet. Now alphabet is called that because those are the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta. The same thing operates for the Hebrew alphabet, which starts off with Aleph and Beit. We're going to see these letters as part of Beth Goldstein's exhibit here in this corner, this nook between Fountain View and the elevators here on the first floor. We have here a little bit about the artist behind the art, Beth Goldstein. And she has, we have 5 letters that we're going to be looking at each one individually. The first 4 letters as well as the 10th letter of the Aleph Beit.
So in a conversation that you'll see in connection to this little glimpse of her art that I had with Beth, she'll talk about her inspiration for the work and her history as an artist, but I'll just say that I've known her for a very long time from her work here at Cedar Village. And like you said, we have 5 pieces. They're mixed media pieces, which I believe I go into a little bit more in depth about what mixed media is in just a moment. But just to say, we do have a little plaque here on the wall, and that's what Rabbi and I just keep looking at and referring to here. And I encourage, when you do come through the lobby, to take a look at the art. Please be sure and stop. This will tell you a little bit more about her work, herself, and her history. She is a member of the American Guild of Judaic Art, which is a little bit prestigious. There are Jewish artists all around, and that would be a way to locate them and raise awareness of the work that they do. And so that is mentioned here, as well as a little bit of how she frames her artwork and how she sees it in the overall perspective of art.
So now we're going to look at each of these letters that are here adorning our walls, and we're going to start off with none other than Aleph. Here we are at Aleph. This is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it is, it's interesting when we think about each of the letters that they're not just, in English, okay, sure, we have our 26 letter alphabet, but in Hebrew, what's really fascinating is that they kind of graduated out of initially being sort of like, I want to say phonographs or
pictograms.
Pictograms, that's the word. They originated out of pictograms because people are depicting real life things around them in sort of like compressed symbols. And so that's the case actually, as we're about to discover through the 5 letters here. And we start off with Aleph. Now, Aleph doesn't necessarily look at first glance like anything, that's readily apparent. However, it derives from the word Aleph, which is ox. Ox are obviously very useful for farming. They're also something that were very valuable animals. They were also things that in the temple times were offered up as sacrifices. So ox were around. This is something that people used in commerce, in farming. So it was something that was very useful, and clearly it made it to the head of the alphabet. And speaking of head, it also kind of looks, you can see, just like an ox, little horns. So it kind of looks like a little animal with horns. So that is Aleph.
Okay, so speaking a little bit more about Beth Goldstein's handling of this letter when she created this piece. So she would take the letter itself, so the form of it you would see, fill it in with color, pattern, and different variations of those colors. So she used a material called gouache. Gouache is a paint, and it's not one that most people are familiar with. It's something in between a watercolor and an acrylic, if you had to put them together and find something in between. So it has the fluidity of a watercolor paint, flows really nicely on the paper, but then it has the coverage So it's opaque like an acrylic paint. So it's easy to cover up if you make any mistakes. The beauty of using a gouache is it has unlimited capability of mixing colors. You can mix more colors with it than you can with any other type of paint. And so she can really get a large variety of colors in her work. And then she would mix the gouache, and she would use that in areas of the artwork. And then she'd also use paint pens perhaps, to get texture or pattern in the work as well. So she would call this work a mixed media. Media being material, mixed being, it's a combination of those things. So putting those together, these artworks are all mixed media artworks. In it, if you look closely, you see a mixture of colors, bold contrast of colors between the black and the white. In majority of the works, she uses white as an element, and I think I mentioned that again in a later work. So she would use that to surround the art, make it stand out, and also use it to create lines in the artwork. Black in this one kind of recedes to the background. We have a little bit of a background. And then we have some beautiful teal tones and purples, as well as bronze. She does have a little pop of red as well, which in my conversation with her, she mentions red as a signature color for her. Lots of artists have signature colors. Green is mine. I like to throw it into almost everything I do. She uses a pop of red in most of her work.
Interesting. Yeah, here it's really just sort of almost like a slight little accent. It doesn't dominate. It's just sort of there.
Absolutely. So she's really got a mixture, mostly cool colors in this piece, which we will see a variety in the work. Okay.
Yeah, for me it's fascinating to see. You mentioned the black sort of fading into the background, pushing things up. You also have the white that really breaks things up as a barrier. For me, what's fascinating is the pen stuff, the swirly, I don't know, you have it here with the purple, here with the purple, here with the silver. And even here, I thought it was brown, but it's bronze. It's not fully colored through. It almost reminds me kind of like bird's feathers. It's an interesting mix of visuals.
Textures and patterns, which she's playing with. And I do see it a little like a quilt pattern. So you're piecing together these different patterns as if you would piece together little patches of cloth to create an overall cohesive image.
Now on to Bet. We are now on to the letter Bet, and the Bet is the second letter in the Aleph Bet, the alphabet. And the Bet looks, well, it actually is similar to the Hebrew word for bayit, and the word bayit literally means house. And you can kind of see that here. There is a structure, a canopied structure, and so that's where the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet comes from. It's the house. Which is, and in as much as we talked about cattle with the very first letter of the alphabet being instrumental for commerce, for food, but the home is definitely, foundational to human existence. Okay.
She chooses a little bit more subdued colors on this one. There's lots of these golds and copper tones in here, and very much use of black around the letter versus the first one we saw. She has a white outline, so she's using white as a design element by choosing what areas to leave blank on the page.
Oh, wow.
Versus here, the letter is definitely outlined in a heavy black. I like the pattern that she uses on this, and it reminds me of like shutters on a house. It's this lines over and over. So when you get a chance to walk by here and look closely at it, you can see these different textures. Something else that I love about her work is it has a patchwork quality. So you might think of all these different patterns and colors a lot like fabrics and how those are patched together. And when you think of this as a home, it just definitely reminds me of a comforting quilt that you might find in a home. And I think I'd love to ask her about that on our next conversation that I have. But when I look at these, it's the patchwork quality, it's comforting to me.
Something that stands out to me is how much less solid color there is in this one versus what we saw in the Aleph. There was a lot more sort of chunks of solid colors. Here, I mean, the closest we get is either the white or maybe even the striped black, but there's so much other just that colorfully, quilt-like design.
There's patterns throughout. And in talking to Beth about her work, some of that would be intentional, and some of it would be very much a go with the flow sort of thing in her process. So as she goes along, she's just kind of letting each section inform the next part.
Cool. We're now on to the third letter of the Aleph-Bet, or the Hebrew alphabet, which is the letter Gimmel. Now the letter Gimmel basically comes from Gamal, which again sounds very similarly, and that means a camel. And we can kind of see this looks to some degree camel-like with kind of that head and a little bit of some of the legs. Now they couldn't do like a real full-on camel, but at least it's sort of like the front part of the camel, as it were. So, you know, when you're in the Middle East, which is where Hebrew's from, you're going to need camels to get around. So that's, you know, we've already talked about home, you know, the commerce, and now we're also talking about transportation. And those are just the first three letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
I find it really interesting, and Beth mentions the camel when she talks about her description over here. So she definitely had that in mind when she painted this. In lots of artwork, when you see this strong line going across the middle, it's a horizon line. So it's basically setting a scene and making it a landscape.
Wow.
Even if it's an abstract landscape. But whenever you do that, your eye automatically identifies it as sky and ground. It's this funny little optical illusion.
Wow.
So I can't help but notice that it's as if the camel is walking on a ground here.
She kind of has this here, kind of like a second leg, almost like the parallel side of the camel. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in the background here, we have this sky blue. I really think that might be part of what she's thinking here.
Yeah.
And this almost looks like a structure in the background.
Huh.
You know, you have this shape that you would recognize, a triangle, as if it was a roof, and then this separate building sort of structure off to the side. And I love, this would remind me of a really beautiful carpet that you might see in actually the Middle East. So I, again, don't have Beth here to ask her directly if that's what she was referencing in the image, but I do know she did talk about thinking of a camel moving forward. And so there's that potential in this artwork, which I find interesting because the others are very abstract. And so to be able to identify some sort of realism in this, it's a little bit fun to have it different from the others.
We're now on to the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Dalet. Now Dalet, like we've heard or seen before, or really both, Dalet sounds a lot like Dalet, and Dalet is the Hebrew word for door. So now we've had so far some pretty central pieces of life. We've had cattle, which is important for commerce and even for food. We've also had a house, we've had transportation, and now we're getting into getting in and out of the house and or securing it. So as we can see, the Dalet here is, well, it kind of looks like at least part of a door, a door frame. So that's we are now on to Dalet.
I find it really interesting. Of course, I do not know Hebrew, and so I don't know the history of the letters, but looking into these and then trying to associate imagery, I definitely see the door from the frame shape. But what I also find interesting is when I first looked at this artwork, I initially thought, oh my gosh, it's slid in the frame. It's not exactly lined up. So when you look at it carefully, she has leaned the background just slightly at an angle. And I thought, oh no, it's messed up. And I felt the need to fix it. But then I realized, no, the letter is straight. And so it's as if the door is opening, because you would see the door is ajar. I also really love the light that she's put here. And so you might imagine, if you're opening a door, you see the light kind of creeping in. And so I think that there's a part of that. You see this really vivid yellow that we do not see in the previous works, and it's glowing into this orange. So she's got a really subtle change of color there, and it's as if like the sun is coming up behind the letter.
Yeah, it looks very sunrisey. Yeah, almost
Absolutely.
as if you were to open the door to your house and see out, and it's a sunrise.
Yeah. So I really love this one. It's probably my favorite of all the ones we have here because there are those little quirky things about the design. And so that's one thing I wanted to mention is these are artworks, but they're also designs. And there is a difference between art and design, but sometimes they come together. And in this series, they work well together beautifully. So I hope that you'll kind of recognize that she's taking lettering, creating art, but she's also designing around the letter.
We are now on to the fifth and final, which is Yud, which sounds a lot like Yad, or hand. And you can kind of see it. This is kind of like a hand, which that's a hand. This is actually, unlike the first 4 that we have seen, and the other 4 here as part of this exhibit, is that those are the first 4 letters of the alphabet. This is the 10th letter of the alphabet, and so this is Yud. And even as a non-art person, I can tell you this looks so vastly different than the other 4 here in this collection.
I love the contrast of this piece to the other 4. The other 4 really do work well together, even though one is a slightly different size. This one is the same size as one of the others. But completely aside from that, the colors are so vastly different in this piece from the other 4. So where I mentioned that Beth uses white as a design element in all the others, here there is absolutely no white space left on the page whatsoever. It is completely using black. The other thing I really love about this is she includes organic elements, organic meaning like elements of nature in the design. Here you can actually see a kind of a leaf pattern and leaf shape. And all of the shapes here, we've seen some hard angles and some really straight lines in the other ones. Everything here is round and curved, as if it were coming from nature or man. So I love that there's a difference there. She's got a lot of different patterns. We've seen tons of patterns in the other ones, but here the primary design element is a polka dot. And so polka dots are naturally very fun and lively when you see those in designs, but she's using dots of gold or dots of black and alternating them. You see different sizes of dots. So she's sticking with one particular pattern on here and then just changing it. So she changes the dots to swirls, or she changes them to slight squares, but she's sticking with the same sort of pattern, but just slightly changing it in each section of the artwork.
Wow.
Those are often called motifs. It just kind of occurred to me as I was talking, and so that's an art term that you might find. If you have a repeated pattern throughout, it would be referred to as a motif.
We hope you've enjoyed each of these 5 pieces here as part of this exhibit. Jessica here has done an interview with the artist herself.
I think it's really wonderful anytime you get a chance to ask an artist about their artwork. And so, you know, I can look at these pieces and I can interpret them or give my perception of them, but anytime you can hear firsthand where an artist is coming from, it's always the best way to understand art and really appreciate it. So we will be hearing firsthand from Beth about her experience and her art. Beth used to come to Cedar Village and do ceramics with us, and that's how we met. She would come and bring ceramics to paint with our residents.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that, Beth. When did you start doing that?
It's been at least 15 years ago now, because a lady named Dory Berman, who everyone knows and loves and who's no longer with us, she did start that and needed a partner and saw me in Temple one day and knew I did ceramics because I have a kiln. And she said, come on, I want you to meet some special people one day with me. And I hopped along and that was it. I was very much stuck to it after that because the residents were so wonderful. And we just did in whatever space was available. We had all sorts of things for them to paint, and I would glaze them, and Dory and I would glaze them and get them fired for them, and then they loved getting them back.
When I started working at Cedar Village around 8 years ago, that was one of my favorite programs to get to peek in on, was when you were painting ceramics.
Yeah.
And then I loved seeing about a month later when you would come back with the finished products. It was just such a joy to see the surprise on everyone's faces at how beautiful the work looked.
I know they always come in saying, I'm no good at this. I can't do this. I shouldn't be here. And I'd say, no, you can. And I know you can. And I'll show you how. And don't look at anybody else's work. Just look at them. And the best part was bringing them back to them, like you said, later, a few weeks later, because then they'd go, that's not mine. I couldn't have done that. And I said, see? So it brings out, a little bit of a different quality in them than they're used to. And it's a good feeling of pride to know anything you can make yourselves.
Awesome. I totally agree. And I tell people that every day at Cedar Village. So before we go too much further into, I want to get back to your ceramics in just a few minutes, but I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the series of work that we have at Cedar Village now. We have 5 pieces, I think. Is that right? Hanging.
So.
And so I'd love to tell us a little bit about the background, where those pieces, how they came about, and how long ago did you create them? A little bit of history on those.
Well, you actually have 5 out of 10. Hopefully there will be 10 in the series, because in the Hebrew alphabet, which is what they are, Hebrew letters from the alphabet, the first 10 letters also have numeric qualities, numeric values. So I thought I would focus on the first 10. In this, which is my second effort or second go at working on some sort of representations of the vitality and significance and mystery behind the Hebrew letters. I did a great big book quite a long time ago, which we did show at Cedar. I'll find those pictures for you. And those were all black and white, just prints, and really didn't have the color that I wanted. And so I wanted to try again. And these are individual because it's interesting how each Hebrew letter has its own story and stands on its own. I've done art forever. I mean, I was the kid in grade school who would make mom go get one of those poster boards for any project I had to do to avoid writing a report. And so I've always kind of relied on art as in terms of my expression or production of anything. And then, the older you get, the more it means to you. And I just got to a point where art in itself was significant. And I got my master's at the Art Academy, which we all know and love. But it really wasn't until I had just about finished that degree that I suddenly started, out of a day of trying to avoid what other project I was assigned to, started messing my brush up and papers up with Hebrew letters and putting my Judaica or Judaism with my art is really what was the spark. And I've really not looked back. That's been my focus since.
Great. How long have you been doing Judaic art and lettering? And
probably about 17 or 18 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about your art, and I know as we were discussing pieces to choose for hanging at Cedar Village, is color. And we talk so much about color at Cedar Village and the work that I do there in groups, and color choices and how vibrant colors really, affect people's mood and people are drawn to art with the colors. So how do you choose your color schemes? What do you think about that?
I think one thing that's interesting is that I always am surprised myself at the colors I choose. I mean, I never thought of myself as being so attracted to such a wide variety of colors or the brightness and intensity of the colors that I usually work with. But that's part of what, for some reason, compels me to, do the work. I think color, expresses mood and sets a tone, and it really makes the art, unique. It's a big remembering factor that you have. Color will attract you to a work of art more maybe than the subject matter or anything else.
Absolutely.
So I actually rarely, if ever, pre-choose my colors. It's part of the process for me, because I like to look at what one is that I've put down will help me decide what the next one should be next to it. And I orchestrate the page according to a certain balance in colors, in terms of values and hues that I see on the page. So I rarely go like from corner across down. I might work here and then here and here and here because it's continually, assessing which color is talking louder than the others, and which is not being heard enough. And so I work with them that way. I may have a scheme that starts to flow just sort of by itself. Get intrigued with greens and one green after another. But those are usually to add depth or perspective. The composition of the work is usually defined by a variety of colors.
I can totally identify with all of those things that you said. So I'm right there with you. People are always asking me that question, what colors do you choose? And I said, yeah, it's really just kind of part of the process and a go with the flow feeling. You feel the colors as you go along and respond to what's there on the canvas or on the paper. So I totally feel you on that.
It's a very personal thing.
It really is. And I mean, I know some artists gravitate to some colors more than others.
Right.
And so you see that reoccurring in their work.
Right.
And again, there's those of us that really do it according to our mood.
Right.
Where we're at.
I remember in grad school, one of the professors saying to me, noticing that I always had some red in almost everything I did, but not a lot. I mean, no one would have ever said, well, she's the painter that uses red or whatever. And I was almost stumped by it because I didn't even realize myself that it was an element that I had to have in there. It just has to have some red almost always. I think it's just, not very mysterious that it's a life, affirming color, and that it just gives life to every and any, work, no matter how big of an area it occupies or not. So that's been a fun thing to even follow myself.
I love that. So another question I have for you that I get a lot, who can you name one or two artists that are your favorite artists or artists that influence your work?
Well, I have to say that I was reading a little tiny book one day by artist named Matisse that we all know very well. And he had a little quote in there that said, I found my artistic self by looking at my earliest works. And I thought that was interesting because it made me go back. I'm one of those people who kept every little practically piece of art or poster or that I had done, from my early grade school and high school years. Not that they were award winning, but I just kind of hung on to them, not realizing that I would be glad because I did go back and look at them and was just knocked out to see that the shapes and the flow of the work and the quality of the of the brush strokes were really indeed not unlike what I was doing right now, a million years later. So Matisse ranks way up there with me because he speaks my language, or I feel like we have a kinship there. I love Richard Diebenkorn, who is a contemporary painter from out west in California. It's his surface treatment and composition of the areas in California that he might paint that are attractive to me. They're very large paintings, flat, landscape-like, but he's a total contemporary guy, excuse me. So it may not be a name you recognize as well. And of course, Ben Shahn is hugely influential because his Hebrew letters just are unlike any others. They flow, they talk, he has such a grasp of them, both physically and mentally and visually, that he can do what he wants with them and never lose what they really are. Whereas I'm always a little bit concerned that if I lose the traditional shape of a letter too much in my work, it'll end up saying something contrary to what I intend. So, and he also uses it within his drawings. I love the way he installs his letters into his illustrations.
Thank you. Absolutely. Those are great. So I mentioned I want to come back to the ceramics. Just recently, our most recent production for Rabbi Drew and myself for our Village Arts Insights is what we call our little video series that we do, was on the mosaic wall right outside the CRCC. The huge installation there with all the plaques. And so I gave a little background about the process of ceramics making. And so since ceramics is one of your primary medium, I was wondering, what is your favorite part of the process? So for residents that might be thinking about, gosh, how detailed that was, and wow, that's so intensive. So I would love to hear what part of the process do you enjoy the most of ceramic making?
The interesting thing is that it is ceramics that I do, but it's the surface of them that intrigues me. Unlike a lot of painters or artists who see a blank piece of paper and like or their blank canvas and they're like, well, I hate to start, I don't know what to do. I hate to start. I don't want to ruin it. I'm really compelled to change that plain surface as soon as I see it. I can't wait to get into it because I know nothing else will happen until I do something. So I don't really have the fear of the blank canvas. I have the fear of what happens afterwards that I have to work with. And the funny thing is the same is true for a piece of pottery. I should have one right here. Because it's not the making of the shapes. That's why I don't do throwing or the wheel. I'm really not a potter. It's just the fact that I discovered these beautiful, smooth, finished, pristine white surfaces that were just begging me to change them.
They're blank slates, asking for color.
They are. And unlike a lot of people who do pottery and do decorate it, every single surface is important to me. I mean, people will turn my platters over and see that I've done something to the back too. To me, it's all as important. So, but more real specific to ceramics is that no matter what I do or how many times I do it, I'm still like a kid when I open the kiln.
Yes.
It's just still, you never know. And it always looks better than you think, like I tell everyone else. And it's a neat thing to see that product, come to completion when you open the kiln.
I love that. And, it takes me back to the days of learning that in undergrad. And those were some of my favorite classes were when I first started using glazes and painting the surfaces. So I wasn't as much into the process of again, wheel throwing or even hand building the ceramics. But as a painter, I identified with the glazing and the coloring and the painting process was just what really turned me on. And I totally agree, pulling it out of the kiln or even pulling it out of the fire and doing raku firing just to see how those colors have changed and emerged was just so exciting.
It's interesting because you made choices about the glazes and the colors you want, the patterns, but the kiln does its own thing. And so you're kind of a little bit out of control. And I think that's part of what's, interesting is to be able to step back and let that phase of the process do its own thing, and then back away and be able to see what it is, knowing you really did make it that way, but that kiln and had a lot to do with it too. So
awesome. So as I hung the work, the images that we have of yours at Cedar Village the other day, I'm standing there reflecting on them, and I happened to glance into the therapy room, and right on the wall where I'm standing and looking is this large plate that says Sally's Place. And I loved that I could see that and see your work there in a different medium simultaneous to where these pieces were hung. And this was where I hung them was not where I'd intended. So it actually just happened to be there. And so for residents that might venture into the therapy room, can you tell us a little bit about that piece that they might see on the wall there?
Well, that's the curator in you. Going, saying, hey, that goes with that and that works. And so I give you full credit. That's a nice little plus to the arrangement you've chosen. Sally Corkin was with Cedar Village for many years in an executive position. And when they started doing a lot of remodeling, I think it used to be, I think there was an art room, kind of where the therapy room is now. But physical therapy being so vital to the residents that usually live at Cedar Village, it became so important they needed bigger and better space. And physical therapy has become such a instrumental part of their lives. And so you really need the top quality people. And in order to get top quality therapists, you have to have equipment and space and so forth. And so Cedar Village did take on this remodel of that certain area. And one of the, I believe he was a board member at the time. If not, I know Sally, of course, was, that decided that he wanted, her husband, that is, wanted to dedicate the kitchen area of rehab, because it's always one of the final phases before individuals can either go back to where they lived or back to their own residence in Cedar Village, that they can manipulate their own kitchen, cook and do this. So they have a little trial kitchen there.
Yes.
And so he dedicated that to them. He wanted to dedicate it to Sally. And knowing me, somehow just thought perhaps I could make a signage. And he said, I want it large, but both he and Sally are a little bit like, wow. I found the largest platter I could find.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's huge.
And the nice part was that the company that Cedar Village hired to do the interior design aspect, not the building, but the interior design aspect, sent to me little squares of the curtains and the chairs and everything that was going to be in there, so that I could see, talking about color, in this case, it did need to work for them more than for me. And so that's how the colors got to be what they are. They're very pastel but bright and happy.
Beautiful aqua green. I love the background color of it.
And so I wanted it something that could be seen and read, so the letters are large. And I really didn't know that I was going to use a big round platter. I don't think they did either, but it's been up there, and it seems to identify what it was meant to do. Identify. And in the presentation, Sally was pretty surprised, which was great, because it's always a little bit, to have something in your honor, but it was well deserved. And I think a lot of people will remember that she, was a big part of it at that time.
And she still is.
Yes, that's true.
She is still part of Cedar Village. So I love that. But I did not want to let you go from the call today before I mention that, because our residents do see that every time they go in and out of the therapy room. It's there. And I think for many, they don't know the significance of it. Part of our intent on this series that we do of these video talks about art around Cedar Village is preserving the history and letting residents know about what they're seeing every day.
That's great.
And what it means and what's the stories behind it. So I love why I had you here, a chance to throw that in.
Good one, Jess. I'm glad you mentioned it, actually. Thank you.
You're welcome. So just before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned doing some work with synagogues, and I know you have done much work. Tell us a little bit about, other than the lettering and the ceramics, talk about some of the pieces that you have done for some of the local temples.
Well, thank you for considering that work too, because I think I was probably the most flattered in terms of being an artist as I've ever been when the Rockdale Temple, which I've belonged to, I'm a third generation member, had a 190th anniversary coming up a few years back. We're going on our 200th in a year and a half or so, and wanted something to signify and to honor that milestone. And we had, just like a lot of synagogues, Torah covers, for example, that were beautiful but very dated, because they were a dark velvet and had some satin lettering, and were very much of the time that they were made. Probably, very well admired, and they still were, but it is part of what's called Hidur Mitzvah, meaning to do a good work for maintaining the beauty and the integrity of the chapel and the synagogue, and especially the ritual objects in a synagogue or temple. It's important that they be maintained. It's part of what's asked of us as a Jewish people and a congregation. And I belong to what's called the American Guild of Judaic Artists. And that's our prime effort. As it's a national organization, Jewish artists are everywhere, And so that assignment or commission or opportunity came about when I was walking into services one night, unbeknownst to me, kind of got stuck between the rabbi at the time, Sissy Karan, who also is no longer with us, but and one of the members of the board who were talking to each other, and I was sort of in the middle of them, kind of, okay. And suddenly they saw me and went, "Did you ask her?" "No, I thought you asked her." And then, "No, well, you better say something because the meeting's coming up." And I'm like, "You guys trying to ask me something?" And when they said for the 190th anniversary of the congregation coming up, we've been wanting to do something special. And we thought, being our artist in-house, we've got you, and doing a new set of Torah mantles or covers might be something you would be interested in doing. And my knees buckled. I mean, I was trying to act calm, but personally, there's no greater tasks that as a Judaic artist I could have been asked than to help contribute to the new Torah covers. So one thing led to another, and meeting after meeting, and what that meeting committee, who was in charge of doing the getting that to happen, to come together, where I was attending, had kind of gotten focused on wanting the tree of life. And I, in my mind, couldn't think of the tree of life in any other way than, traditional tree of life that we see painted so many times. And then they said, well, let's do summer, winter, spring, and fall, because we had 4 Torah covers plus a 5th, which we could do something else with. And I just thought, I don't want a daisy on the Torah cover, and years later, a rabbi go, "What does this have to do with us?" And the rabbi, out of her insight and knowing me, said, "Why don't we just let Beth interpret?" It was that word, the tree of life, as she sees it, that gave me a spark. And what I did was realize in some research and investigating and thinking that the 4 seasons, as we speak of them casually, are really secular seasons according to the secular calendar. The Jewish calendar, which goes by the moon instead of the sun, doesn't jive up. Our months are not exactly at all the same, albeit that they have Hebrew names, of course, but they still don't.
Right. No, they don't line up.
They don't quite line up. But if you do any research and you look at all, you notice that there is a marriage of sorts, because it's all people. We just use different elements of the universe to track our time spent. And so every fall is when Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah tend to happen. And it's about the fall and the foliage. And then every spring, lo and behold, Passover happens. Passover is about a new beginning. And in winter, when it's cold, we warm it up by lighting 8 lights for Hanukkah. So it was the marriage and the talking back and forth between the two time frames and the two kinds of calendars that I was inspired by, and therefore I interpreted each tree of life in the paintings I did that were to become the cover, part of the covers, with a mystical sort of story about them. Brief example, in fall, the tree of life is a shofar. If you look closely, you can see that it's a shofar, and it spills out the honey that drips over the apples and the fruits of the fall season. And slightly behind it, you can see some lattice work that represents the way we used to always think of a Sukkot, which comes right after those holidays. And so that became the design.
I like that, just melding those images together into one.
So I did those 4 Torah cover paintings with respect to the size of those particular Torahs, because each Torah is a different size and each mantle's different. In gouache painting, not unlike the size, they really weren't that big. It was sort of this size.
Okay.
In color. I mean, in work. And each one was done in gouache, which is opaque watercolor. And it allows you to have a million colors because it mixes like nobody's business. It's not transparent the way watercolor is. So it became very pattern-like as I drew it, and with great detail because I just got into it that way. Well, we weren't going to put paintings up in front, on top of cloth. So it was a decision to have my designs and my paintings transferred to needlepoint canvases. And then we had volunteers from the congregation who were good at needlepointing. I can't do anything with fabric. I'm not good. And thinking it would take, a couple months, we thought, okay, we'll give, 4 or 5 different people these Torah cover needlepoint canvases. And, but it was painstakingly a difficult task because they really used my design to the T. It wasn't like a leaf that had veins in it. I knew I would be having to be comfortable with if it would just turned out to be a green leaf.
Right.
But these stitchers put every vein and every dot and every color change I had and pulled threads to do it that way. So the needlepoint canvases themselves are works of art. And other members of the committee were responsible for finding fabric and sending it off to someone who, would do reupholstering, like that. But not everyone will handle Torah covers. And those were then these needlepoint canvases were blocked and stretched and made to fit, and then hand sewn into this beautiful fabric, and the fabric was each made finally to fit its individual cover. And I still kind of look up and I'm taken aback when the ark is opened, even though I know what they look like and I know they're there. They do represent the work of a congregation, and they represent the 190th. We had a couple who was generous enough to donate enough funds to get them all finished, because we, of course, never realized what it would take. And they did that in honor of their son's a special significant birthday. So everyone came to the forefront to ensure that these happened. So I was just the very beginning of a long process, but just felt very honored to be that.
Oh, I love it. I love the collaboration that you described and how everyone, just truly had a part in it. It's really a beautiful story.
Yeah.
I think a lovely way to wrap up our talk today. Thank you so much for meeting with me and bringing the story of your art to Cedar Village.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for thinking of me, because, you can do a lot of work, but if it just sits in your studio, and I do love Cedar Village. I've, been volunteering there years, and I'm glad to have something you could use, and I hope that the residents will enjoy it.
I know that they already are, and we would love to have you in to visit us as soon as things are fully reopened. So
I'll be buzzing the buzzer.
All right. Thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you, Jessica.
I hope that you enjoyed the question and answer session that I had with Beth via Zoom. It was really a lot of fun talking with her. We've been friends for many years, so it was great catching up and kind of talking about memories of Cedar Village together. She's an accomplished artist from what you heard, and it's just really such a wonderful thing to be able to feature her artwork here, and hopefully to have her come visit us very soon to make some more art with us, whether it be ceramics or paintings in the future. So we really look forward to continuing our relationship with Beth.
Alrighty, so we hope if you are happen to be wandering by this Fountain View Therapy elevator area, and if you are ever happening to stop by, now you can have a better sense and context of what this mixed media presentation is, and we hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much.
All
See you
right,
later.
Bye.